Welcome to third episode of OASIS Insights podcast. Today we have an amazing guest with us, Mr. Rizwan Khan. Rizwan is managing partner in Acclime Vietnam. We are grateful to have him with us today. I would appreciate if Mr. Rizwan, you can start introducing yourself and your journey from Pakistan to managing partner in Acclime Vietnam. Please, Rizwan.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Numair, for inviting me for this interesting podcast and looking forward to have a very interesting discussion with you. So I started my career pretty much about 29 years ago when I joined Chartered Accountancy and then I joined A.F. Ferguson and Co. I still remember the date. It was in August 1997 after passing my CA inter foundation exam at that time, and it was wonderful time there. I learned a lot, worked in different industry, oil and gas, banking, and all these industry. And what I probably did not realize at that time, that the experience I gained during that time was really amazing, and that is still helpful for me. Then in 2004, to be exact, just 3 days ago, I had 20 years anniversary for leaving Pakistan. So I moved to Thailand. Most of Pakistani generally they go for Western countries, Europe, US, UK, etc. Far East, there are very few who come here, and I started there as a senior manager and director for a consulting firm. Lived there for about 3.5 years, wonderful experience. Then in 2008, I was approached by an Australian university to join them as a full-time academic. So RMIT, Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, is one of the top government universities in Australia. So I joined that. I was managing the accounting and law courses both in Saigon and in Hanoi campuses in Vietnam. Then I joined briefly Grant Thornton, moved to Cambodia, wonderful country in this region. But then, of course, Vietnam has a lot more to offer. Then I moved back here and moved into manufacturing industry. There, the first factory I joined, I did the turnaround and managed the factory for about 4.5 years, 5 years, and then moved back to Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon. There, I built a greenfield factory and managed that for a while. In between, COVID came as well. So that was a very tough time. I think in Pakistan and in US, many people do not realize that we had gone through very easily. But in certain countries, even in Vietnam, I remember I used to stay in factory for 7 weeks without going home because it was locked down. Working in the factory, sleeping in the factory, that was the fastest time I could ever go to office. Within 3 seconds, I'm in the office. So it was wonderful time at that time. Then in 2022, I joined Acclime as a partner. Then I became a country head after a few months. And then I took over back in last year. I took over as a managing partner, and I'm running the company here. We have 150 people in Vietnam across 3 offices in Ho Chi Minh City, Hanoi, and Da Nang. Acclime Vietnam is part of Acclime Group, where we have presence in 15 countries. We are from Asia, for Asia, and we are premium professional services firm that involve in accounting and tax compliance, market entry, payroll processing and advisory, employer of record, EOR or POE services, as well as transaction advisory services, due diligence, M&A, etc. So that's a brief history of what I have been doing.
Amazing. You started career with one of the big four, and then you moved into the education side, and now you are again back to the corporate services and consulting. So, how you see this journey, and what motivated you to join again in corporate services?
I believe that all of us who are in chartered accountancy field, especially in Pakistan, we realize that I give an analogy that the sugarcane juice. So in that case, the audit firms are the machines and the aspiring chartered accountants, they are the sugarcane. So working in PwC at that time, I used to do a lot of late sitting. Even during Ramadan, I come to office around 8 o'clock and never go back home before 10 p.m., etc. So that was a really fast-paced environment where I've been working with. When I joined academia, I wanted to take a break. Number one, I wanted to complete my PhD, as well as just wanted to try something new to see how it feels like. So during the time when I was doing my PhD, of course, I was doing other things as well, other professional development, for example, CISA and other things in cybersecurity and other areas. But once I completed my PhD, then it was very less workload in academia, which one would appreciate if they are not coming from the audit firm background, but coming from that background, I think the workload was not really huge and it becomes a little bit different for me, and I decided that I should try something challenging. So I joined Grant Thornton, where I established the business risk services department and worked here in Vietnam as well as in Cambodia. And then, of course, manufacturing was a completely different ball game. So that was the whole motivation behind that. And for me, I compare myself to myself, and I believe in one thing, that if I'm not better than myself yesterday than I am today, then I think I am losing on something. So therefore, it is really important that I just challenge myself to the boundaries that what I could or could not do, and that keeps me going.
Rizwan, you are one of the very few professionals from Pakistan into the diverse culture of Southeast Asia, and you have spent 2 decades there. So, how this looks like? What are the biggest lessons you have learned throughout your journey?
I think there are quite few lessons that I have learned during my journey. I believe the most important thing is appreciation of culture, languages, traditions, etc. in the host country. A lot of Pakistani people, we like to go to Middle East, which is fairly similar to our culture in terms of religion, in terms of practices and other things, even the language, Arabic language. Most of Pakistani, they can understand to some extent. However, coming to Thailand was a big shock for me in the beginning because not many people speak English, number one. Number two, the language is Thai. Official and national language is Thai. So that means everything is written in Thai. So the script of Thai is also very different from English or other languages. Then there are different things in, for example, food, in terms of culture, in terms of giving respect is a little bit different. There are certain subtle things even that do not exist in our society, or other way around as well. Things that do exist in our society may not be in that country. So the first lesson is learn the language. Wherever you go, learn that language, and this is really important because that is the icebreaker, especially if you are in business development or you are in a client facing position. Then that is the most important thing. Even if you are in MNC and you are dealing with local staff, then it becomes even important there as well. The second thing is understanding the culture. That does not mean that you have to follow everything, but you need to understand and you should respect that as well. There are people who may not be very good in that, in the sense that they ridicule the culture, for example, or they try to compare. And I think that comparison is something where things go really bad because every country has a distinct culture, and everyone is proud of their own culture. We as a Pakistani, we are proud of our culture. I would say that I have adapted to quite few cultures in the world, and I'm lucky to have that understanding and appreciation of the culture, and that's how I survived and have grown in those countries as well. Just for example, if I give a certain example, if you are eating in Pakistan, generally we use hands. However, in Southeast Asian nations, for example, in Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand, there people are using chopstick. And using chopstick is something very strange to us because we can use the fork and spoon, but we cannot use chopstick until and unless you tried that. And I'm so much used to of using chopstick that using hand is good. Of course, I still prefer that. But chopstick, if in a social setting, chopstick makes your hands clean and you can actually enjoy the food, you can have a discussion, etc. And it's very different. Again, I'm not saying which one is better. Both cultures have pros and cons. However, I would say that is different and it's interesting to learn all these things.
Now you are playing a leadership role, and how you are able to manage the leadership challenges, like how you are ensuring that you are achieving your goals, how you balance the goals of your team and how you meet the client expectation. What are the leadership traits which are helping you to sustain the leadership role in a professional services firm in Vietnam, which is a very
It's
diverse country?
sure. It is very interesting question, and I would like to give you some comparison in industries that I have worked in. So starting with professional services firms. So in this region, I have worked with three different professional services firms. Generally, your team members or staff, if you like, they are qualified, educated people. Some of them have gone abroad, they came back and they are working in the country. There are some foreigners who are working in the company as well. So it is quite interesting there because in professional services firm, depending on the level, you just give the instructions and you give them some guidance and they can get the things done. However, in managing companies or manufacturing factories, there the things are quite different. And why so? Because if you are dealing with the blue collar workers, those who are very important people in the manufacturing industry, but they are large in numbers. For example, the first factory we had 130 staff that I was managing, and the other one I had 30 staff. So there you have to give the instructions to them. You do not have a consultative style in general. You give the instructions and get the things done. In professional services firm is more about participative style. In academia, for example, there are people who are very academic. There are people who are coming from the industry background, and there are people who have never done anything than teaching. So when I say academic, that means people who are research oriented, etc. So all of them are very different to manage. I had 35 people reporting to me in the university from different nationalities, from Philippines, from Australia, from India, from Vietnam, from Thailand, you name it, everyone is in that faculty. So managing them was very tricky because things that you are talking to, for example, there's a French lady. So the way she's talking is very different than, for example, there's a gentleman from Malaysia. Chinese, Malay, so they are very different, and making sure that all these people are working together, understanding the things. They have very different exposure, they have very different experiences. So it is like that. Now, coming back to professional services firms, in Southeast Asia in general, we have a reverse diversity problem. That means that there are more women in the team as compared to men. So, dealing in these situations, one has to be very careful, very appreciative of the fact that the way you need to deal with educated people and making the gender balance and making sure that there is an inclusion of everyone in the decision as well as different roles is quite challenging. Over last 20 years or so that I have been working in this, those are invaluable experiences, and that helped me to manage the firm in a very different way. And of course, after COVID, things have changed quite drastically. So in the past, you have to be in the office, but now managing remote offices are very similar to as if you are in the office. So that's the things that one has to juggle through that timing and the meetings, etc. So it's much better, it's much more efficient than it used to be in the past.
Amazing lessons, and wish you all the success in managing this diversity. We can see a lot of great things happening in Vietnam. So, what makes Vietnam a desired destination for investors today, and what are the changes at government level in the regulatory landscape happening there right now?
I came to Vietnam in 2008. At that time, doing business, mobility, and other things are not as smooth as they are right now. So, why Vietnam is attractive? For a variety of reasons. Number one is Vietnam has 16 or 17 FTA, free trade agreements, with pretty much every country around the world. And that makes it very attractive because you can actually import or export without paying duties if they are not meant for local consumption, for example. The second thing is there's a huge population of young people. More than, I believe, 50% are below the age of 35 or so. The third reason is that in Vietnam, people value education in itself. Literacy rate is about 96%, and people are spending a lot of money for their children's education. Just to give you a perspective that if a Vietnamese child is going to an international or bilingual school, the fee starts somewhere around $6,000 or $7,000 per year, and they go up to $35,000-$40,000 per year in grade one. So you could imagine that that's such a huge amount of money that people need to invest. On top of that, a lot of Vietnamese parents, they send their children to extra classes, just like we have tuitions in Pakistan, for example. They are sending their children to study English and other languages as well. So English lessons are not cheap either. They cost somewhere around $80 per month to $200 per month. So that is also a huge burden on parent in terms of learning the language, schools, and other things. Even Sunday morning, if you go out at 7 o'clock in the morning, you can see that the students are already on the street. They are going to some school or some extra classes, etc. So they really value education now, which means that that the coming generation in next 15 to 20 years, there will be a huge number of young people who can speak Vietnamese and English and other languages, and that would make Vietnam self-sufficient in terms of the need for the foreign or expat workers or executives. So that is one thing. Apart from that, Vietnamese labor, for example, they are hardworking. Once they commit to something, they will do that. Of course, exceptions are everywhere, but by and large, they work very well. Wages are not very high. Minimum wage is roughly about $170 per month. Of course, nobody goes for that wage, but you're looking at average wage for manufacturing workers around $250 per month, on which makes it much more affordable in this region, for example, compared to China or compared to Thailand. With the geopolitics situation going on after the election in US, there is a fear that the China may face some embargo or sanctions or some kind of tariffs or whatever, a mix of different measures. In that situation, most Western companies, they are moving to Vietnam in order to have an alternate available in case if anything goes wrong in that particular area. So all these factors make it Vietnam very attractive. If you look at the exports figures of Vietnam, it was last year, it was about 370 billion US dollars. There's a huge import. So Vietnam imports a lot of products. I think last year figures were about 340 billion US dollar were imports, or $350 billion. So those numbers make Vietnam a very attractive destination in terms of trading, in terms of manufacturing, in terms of exports. If you look at the large players in the market, so for example, Samsung produces roughly 30% of their global production in Vietnam. They have 7 factories in Vietnam. If you look at Intel, they do a lot of assembling. Majority of assembling is being done in Vietnam. Lego recently announced $1 billion investment in the factory. Pandora, for example, they invest $130 million in a new facility here in Vietnam. And the list goes on. These are just some of the names, not in any particular orders, but these are just well-known name, and there are other brands that already exist in Vietnam. And what Vietnam is doing is also focusing on semiconductor industry and digital transformation, and that makes it very attractive destination for investors.
What challenges are normally faced by foreign companies entering into Vietnam, and how do you guys help them?
Sure. The first challenge that investors face here in Vietnam is the language, because Vietnamese is official as well as national language. So all the filing to the government authorities must be done in Vietnamese, number one. Number two, the processes are different than those in the Commonwealth countries. So if anybody is working in Pakistan, for example, it's fairly simple to adapt to UK or Malaysia or Singapore practices, because the legal system is very similar, and all the procedures are also very similar. In Vietnam, things are quite complicated. In some cases, I have seen investors, they do not understand, they do not believe that that is the case, because there's always a comparison that how things are done in the home country, so then why things are different in Vietnam. And I always tell them that it's compliance, and compliance is compliance, regardless of does it make sense to in terms of comparison or not, but it makes perfect sense in Vietnam. And I would say that the system in Vietnam may not be perfect, may not be 100% accurate, but it is working as a well oiled machine, and it is working for both investors as well as other stakeholders in the country. So what we do is we have, as I mentioned, a team of 150 professionals. I would say that except for 3 or 4 people, everyone is Vietnamese. They are expert in their areas, as well as they speak the language, and they can help the investors through the whole process. And of course, with having foreign partners as well as Vietnamese partners in the firm that help us to navigate through all these complexities of compliance in Vietnam. So we deal actively with the investors, foreign investors, to explain to them in the context of their understanding, and then why Vietnam is doing in certain things, or why Vietnamese authorities require certain things. So we make a bridge between these two. And I would say that in 99.9% cases, once people get to know the system, they actually appreciate it and they go ahead with that.
What sectors or industries are seeing highest number of growth opportunities right now in Vietnam?
At this point in time, I think Vietnam is experiencing growth in pretty much every industry, but most notable ones are manufacturing, definitely because of FTAs, number one. Then education industry also has huge potential of growth, and they are growing, especially after AI. If you look at the service industry, so for example, MSP, managed service providers, a lot of companies, they are coming to Vietnam and they are setting up the service centers here in Vietnam because of the level of education of Vietnamese people, and their expertise in certain areas. I know firsthand that there are a lot of German and Swiss and American companies. They have the service center in Vietnam. From here they are serving to their manufacturing facilities in other countries. If you look at agriculture, for example, there's a huge potential for that as well, because Vietnamese agriculture sector has a very high level of automation, high level of research. They are using sophisticated machines and techniques. For example, most of the vegetables are being grown in water rather than on the land, and I'm talking about the organic and high-end or high priced products. If you look at, for example, if you look at strawberries and other certain things, Vietnam is exporting to Japan, and those are priced at somewhere around $30 per kilo onwards. So these are just some of the examples where Vietnam is doing very well. Trading, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of imports and exports. Trading is also another good business where Vietnam is doing well. Pharmaceutical is another industry where even there's a Pakistani pharmaceutical company exists in Vietnam as well, and they are getting the benefit for having the FTAs and other benefits that Vietnam is offering them.
Coming to the trending topic of sustainability, how much sustainability is important in Vietnam's corporate landscape, and what changes have taken place in the Vietnam, and what are the forthcoming sustainability related regulations in the market, and what role Lime is playing to support the corporates in this journey?
ESG is definitely a very hot topic nowadays, especially when it comes to exported goods to Europe and other countries, for example, textiles and other. So things are becoming very different than they used to be. Sustainability is definitely one of the top agenda item for most manufacturers in Vietnam. At Acclime, we started ESG consulting, where we are supporting our clients to meet the targets of the European countries or other requirements that are going to take place in the near future. And that is something that we always believe in, that the businesses should be environmentally responsible, sustainable, and they make sure that they are doing more to the environment than they are damaging the environment. In the past, there have been few incidents where the companies involved in certain practices that damage the environment, those companies have been fined heavily, and then some of the companies, they lost huge number of customers as well because they were not doing a right thing. So in Vietnam, the understanding of sustainability is quite high, especially in the large cities. People are focusing on that. Companies like us, we have certain days where we do not allow the plastics in the company. For example, we also have, for example, a policy where the printouts are only, for example, only when it is absolutely necessary. And then we also have office design that basically allow natural light to come in so we can work on the protection of environment. Now, coming to the sustainability part, because a lot of companies in Vietnam, they are FDI companies. They are operating as a factory for the suppliers, large suppliers in other countries. So they have to follow the requirements and they have to go with those requirements in order to remain operational in the coming time. What we have seen, a lot of those players, they have actually asking actively now to go for the sustainability. In fact, I have another meeting this afternoon regarding ESG initiative in Vietnam in textile industry.
We can see Vietnam is offering different investment opportunities to the world. What are the returns and risks associated with them? How we can compare it with the neighboring region like Cambodia, Singapore, Indonesia? So where does Vietnam stands in terms of investment landscape for international investors?
Definitely, risks are everywhere. That's why we are in business. But if you look at the risk in Vietnam, so political risk is almost zero. Very stable government for the last many decades. So there is no change in policies as such. It's a continuation of the policies. Vietnam does not have any conflict with any neighboring country, which is also a blessing. That is one thing. On the eastern side of Vietnam is all water, so there are a lot of ports available to Vietnam. There is a huge number of tourists coming to Vietnam as well. That is growing the hospitality industry in Vietnam as well. In terms of investment, Vietnam allows foreign direct investment to almost every line of business. There are only few lines that are not allowed to be owned 100% by foreigners. I would say that 85% of all types of businesses are allowed to have 100% foreign ownership, which is very different than, for example, Thailand, where 51% must be a Thai nominee. If we compare with Singapore, Singapore is a wonderful place for doing business, but it is too expensive. So that is always a challenge, what we are looking at. And if we look at the profit repatriation, Vietnam does allow majority of the profit to be repatriated to the parent company once the audit is finalized and tax liabilities have been settled. Generally, in the month of April or May, companies will remit their dividends to parent companies. So there are no issues. Once the company goes into dissolution, then the company can remit the capital as well as any retained earning back to the parent company as well. So that is also possible. In terms of labor protection and employee and employer protection, Vietnam is doing very well in that. There is a structured approach for both employer and employee to make sure that they are working in the best interest of each other, and government authorities will intervene only when there is a dispute, and generally it is fair treatment on part of both employer and employees.
Would you like to explain what factors are going to shape the corporate services landscape of Vietnam? the upcoming 5 years?
So, Vietnamese accounting system or VAS consists of the standards and practices that are designed by the Ministry of Finance and other relevant authorities, for example, CPA Vietnam, etc. So, those have been the practices. If we look back in 2008 to 2015, for example, that was the time where everything was controlled very strictly. In 2015, Circular 200 came in, and that changed the landscape quite drastically. Things eased down. What we have seen in 2020, 2018 to 2020, the other things have been changing as well. IFRS adoption is on 1st of January 2025. As of now, there is no indication that it may or may not be implemented. So far, that is the deadline. However, I would say that it may be delayed for some time. And of course, even for the companies, when they are going for IFRS adaptation, so that would be voluntary in the first couple of years, perhaps, and then it will become mandatory for every company to go for that. And the reason being because the tax system in Vietnam basically govern the accounting practices as well. What does it mean? That the VAS is mostly form over substance type of reporting than the substance over form. That does not mean that they does not allow substance over form. The bigger challenge is that if a company goes for substance over form presentation of the financial statements, then they have to prepare a form over substance financial statement as well to ensure that the tax authorities are satisfied with that. And the onus of accuracy of tax return is on the taxpayer. Unlike in other countries where the tax department tells the taxpayer that you are doing something wrong, in Vietnam, taxpayers have to ensure that they satisfy the requirement of tax department, that they are doing everything correctly. And I believe that this system is much better than giving independence to the taxpayers to do the right thing, because by the time that certain tax frauds are surfaced, it is too late. There's a time barred situation as well. And we have seen in many countries that there have been tax frauds. In Vietnam, in that perspective, the tax department is doing a wonderful job to make sure that the tax frauds have been reduced to a very minimum to none. Now, how it will affect the companies, I would say that even if IFRS is implemented on 1st of January 2025, I would say that most companies will start working towards that. And there will be, I believe, 2 or 3 years time period, the transitioning period, where the companies may struggle, but then they will become compliant with IFRS. And that's where Acclime Vietnam, we already prepared for that. We have team members and managers and directors who are well versed in IFRS as well. We also, because we are dealing with the foreign clients, so we basically convert the FS from VS to IFRS. So we understand all the complications and the subtleties in these two systems, and we can help our clients in both areas.
What advice you would like to give to the new entrants who are seeking expansion into Southeast Asia, particularly Vietnam?
If anyone wants to come to Southeast Asia, I would say that it is very important that you should be on the ground to understand that which country is better suited for your needs. Each country has something different to offer. That does not mean that one country is better than the other, it's just different. Then also it depends on certain other factors as well. So, for example, Singapore may be preferred over Malaysia, or for example, Malaysia is preferred over Thailand, etc. So it does not mean that those countries are not good enough. Those countries have a lot to offer, but may not be suitable for the needs or the present needs of the investors. And the second most important thing is to have a trusted advisor, to have a discussion with them and make sure that you are doing things right. Because in some cases, we have seen that clients want to proceed very, very fast. They can start with some players in the market, those who overpromised and then their delays kicked in. sometimes the compliance is not being done. So we have seen cases where the companies faced the problem when they went into dissolution at the end of their investment life. So they had problem remitting funds overseas because they were not set up properly and they were not compliant. So all these really matter. What I have been doing and what I have been telling my clients as well as potential clients, that why I am doing this, why Acclime Vietnam is doing something, is because we make sure that the interest of the investors are protected and the risks are managed, and they are fully aware of the pros and cons of each options that they would like to take. And then it will be an informed decision on the part of investors to make sure that they understand fully and clearly all the risk involved and all the potential problems that they might face in the future. And then it is their choice whether they go with option one or option two, or they go for some even option three that may or may not exist.
Thank you, Rizwan. It was a wonderful conversation where our listeners can connect with you to learn more about your services, to learn more about Vietnam, and learn more about the Acclaim Vietnam.
Thank you very much for inviting me for this session. It was wonderful talking to you. If anybody is interested in discussing Vietnam further, then please feel free to visit our website, vietnam.acclime.com, acclime as in ACCLIME. And then, of course, Numair will share the links as well. We also have presence on LinkedIn, Facebook, and other social media as well. We are more than happy to have a discussion with you. There are a lot of articles that are available on our website free of cost, and we also more than happy to have a free consultation with you, with any potential investor or anyone who is interested in Vietnam. More than happy to discuss with. Thank you very much.